Thank you. So my name is Andy Hellard, and I'm Director of Product Management at Matic. So I've got a background as an engineer and an engineering manager, so I came to product management from the technical track. In my career, I've worked at 4 different companies that have had international operations, whether that is development offices elsewhere, business offices elsewhere, or we sell a product that actually was sold in multiple global markets. I am personally based in Columbus, Ohio, which is, if you'd like to picture it, about halfway between New York and Chicago. Matic is a venture-backed startup founded in 2014. And what we do is we sell insurance. We sell homeowners insurance as part of the process of getting a mortgage loan. And we have offices in Columbus, we have offices in San Francisco, California, and we also have an office here in Lviv. So many of the things that I'm going to be talking about today are driven directly by the experiences that we have at Matic. The first section of my presentation, I want to talk about some of the challenges that you have when you are building a digital product that targets a global market. And when I say global market, what I mean is that you're building a digital product that is going to be bought and used by people who are not in the country in which you live. And there are a lot of unique challenges that come along with building these products. So why would you need to target a global audience? Well, here what I have is a chart of the different sizes of countries' economies. So the entire chart is the entire world's economy, and then each piece is about how much of that country makes up the entire economy. So as you can see, even the single largest market, the United States, is less than 25% of the entire global economy. So if you have a product that has a wide appeal, if you can break outside of the single market that you're in, then ultimately you have a much greater opportunity for profit and a much greater opportunity for a successful company. But there are a lot of challenges that come along with expanding outside of the market that you know and that you understand. Now, as product managers, what we have to ask ourselves is, number one, is our product of interest to other countries, to other markets? And second, what are the expectations and needs of those customers that are in these other markets? And as product managers, if we're not the one that thinks about the customer and thinks about their needs and thinks about how our product might meet the needs of the people in those markets, then no one else is going to. So this is very much a problem for a product manager. So I'm going to start with a simple example. Let's imagine that you are a product manager for an email newsletter. You want to send out an email, and in this email, it has news that is of interest to your customer. So if you're an American product manager, you might build a form that looks a little like this. Very simple. I have a first name, I have a last name, and I have an email address. Right? This should work for every country in the world. All I need to do is translate it into the local language. No problems at all. Well, if you are a product manager that has done this before, you immediately start to see some of the problems. Does everybody have one first name? Everybody in the entire world, do they have one first name? What about middle names? What happens if you have the same person with the same first name and the same last name? You might need to collect a middle name as well. Does everybody have a single last name? Everyone in the entire world. Do some people have 2 last names, connected with a hyphen? Do some people have no last name at all? Does everybody use email? What about China? WeChat is the primary way that people communicate in China. So if you've got information that you're trying to share, is an email newsletter really the right way to go about it? And finally, as you guys know, does everybody use the same alphabet? No, they do not. Now, there is one big advantage to this form, and the engineers in the room have already spotted it. And that is that these forms match very neatly to your database fields. So implementing this would be technically very easy. But as product managers, that's not really what we want to do. So let's talk about some examples. Everyone has a name, right? How hard could this be? So this top line is my name, and this is a very common way to write it in the United States. First name, middle initial, last name. Very, very common, United States, Canada, places like that. Well, in the United Kingdom, they're more likely to have a given name, 2 or more middle names, and then a last name. Okay, this guy could probably fill that form out. He wouldn't like it, but he could figure it out. Well, let's go to Iceland. And we have Bjork here. So Bjork has a given name, but she doesn't really have a family name. She has what we would think of her last name as being derived from her father's name. Additionally, she has a lot of non-ASCII characters in her name. And so if you've encoded your database in ASCII and not Unicode, Bjork cannot fill that form out at all. Okay, it's going to be hard for Bjork. Now let's go to China. And we have Mao Zedong. Now, Mao Zedong can write her name in quite a few different ways. She could do it in traditional Chinese characters. She might do it in simplified Chinese characters. She might do it in the Latin alphabet this way. Or she might have picked a westernized name, such as Kate, that is much easier for people, for example, from the United States to say. So how should we have Mao Zedong fill out this form? Now let's go to India. This is really fun. In this case, we have a village name, a father's name, a given name, and then a last name. So if we want to send him an email newsletter, how is he supposed to fill that form out? Okay, he might get there, but Indonesia is where we have a huge problem because they just have one name. It's a first name, it's a last name, it's a middle name. All they have is one name. So if, like a good engineer, you put validation on that form, he can't ever get past it because he doesn't even have a last name. And so once again, as a product manager, we have to think about these things. So let's look at this form a different way. This looks very similar, but there are some very subtle differences. So first what we do is say, what is your full name? We don't separate it out into middle name, last name, first name. Just let them put in whatever their full name is. Second, we ask, what should we call you? And we've separated these two things. We've let the customer solve our problem. So instead of trying to parse out that full name, just let the customer tell you. And then finally, we let them pick the channel. Because as a product manager, my product is not an email newsletter. My product is information. I want to share information with people. So why should I limit them to a single channel that may or may not work for them? By offering the same information in multiple communication channels by default, as a product manager, I've delivered my product in the most effective way. And finally, we'll let them pick a character set and a language. You don't have to support all of them, but when you move into a market, always be sure that you know what the most common language and character set is. Now, the engineers in the room have spotted the problems with this form. And the problems with this form is that these fields do not map neatly to a database. And we've encountered this recently inside Matic when we did a very similar change to names. When you go in and have to parse this out, it becomes a real technical challenge. But you have to ask yourself, are you willing to spend the money and do you have the time and the resources to do an implementation like this? And if you don't, you need to think and consider it before you move into a market and not after. I want to give you a few examples. This is 2 screenshots of the United Airlines website. United Airlines is a very large American airline. They look identical, right? Not quite. One of them is English United States. One of them is English United Kingdom. What's the difference? They speak English in both places, right? Except for Scotland. I'm not sure what they speak in Scotland, but it is not English. Here's the difference. Americans expect the week to start on Sunday on a calendar. The English expect it to start on Monday. So this is a great example of localization. So the English see what they expect to see, the Americans see what they expect to see. And if you are a jet-lagged American in London trying to buy a plane ticket home, you might buy it for the wrong day if you're not paying attention. Let's talk about language. In design, many times what we say is put the most important thing in the upper left and then the least important thing in the lower right. Well, does everybody read from left to right? No. In Hebrew and Arabic, you read from right to left. In certain kinds of Chinese writing, you read from top to bottom. So let's take an example here. This is Sky News, which is a major news organization. On the left-hand side, we have their United Kingdom version, and on the right-hand side, we have their Middle Eastern version. The logo's in a different place. It's in the upper left for people that read from left to right. Here, they've moved it to the middle because that's the cultural expectation. They're going to see it right here in the middle. Where's the home icon? In the English version, it's on the left. In the Arabic version, it's on the right, because that's where the eye falls. I experienced this myself at my last job. We built software for enterprises that generated things like insurance policies and bank statements. And we had a sales team that wanted to expand and sell in the Middle East. Now, the problem was not just taking our UI and translating it into Hebrew or Arabic. The problem was that we had to take all of the text boxes and reverse them so that they started typing on the right and moved to the left. Because if we made them do it the other way, there's no way they could have sold this product. So as a product manager, what I had to do was evaluate the sales opportunity. I had to figure out if the salespeople were lying to me about the size of the deal or if they could close it, and then whether we wanted to spend our scarce development resources on developing this feature. Ultimately, we did, and we moved into the Middle Eastern market, but it was a significant engineering effort because the local people told us what we had to do to make our product fit. One more example from my recent life. So, Matic recently integrated with an insurance carrier. And one of the things that we do is we pass information about your home, how old it is, how big it is, what's the roof made out of, and the insurance company gives us a price back, how much the insurance will cost. So we started passing a value of aluminum, which is a very common siding material. The outside of the house is covered in aluminum siding. And the insurance carrier kept giving us an error back in the API. Every time we said aluminum, we got it back. We checked the documentation. Documentation said aluminum is fine. So I called them and asked what happened. And our contact said that's very confusing. Aluminum is a valid value for the API. Let me find out what happened. So he went down and he talked to his developer. And we found out that the developer spoke British English, not American English. And the British don't say aluminum, they say aluminium. And so he had spelled in the code aluminum as aluminium, but the documentation writer spoke American English and had written down aluminum. So confusion over a word that both people knew how to spell correctly caused us a problem when we had to work across cultures. And so a lot of these nuances of language really can affect your day-to-day work. Lastly, I want to talk about a physical product. I've been talking about digital products. I have eaten in McDonald's on 5 continents. It is very comforting if you're American and you've been abroad for a long time. You can go in, you can get a Coca-Cola. In Japan, if you go into a McDonald's in Tokyo and you order a large Coca-Cola, you will get about 600 milliliters of Coke. That's a large Coke in Japan. If you go into a McDonald's in the United States and you order a large Coca-Cola, you are going to get 900 milliliters of Coke. So if McDonald's had not considered this when they took their product to a new environment, and they had given 900 milliliters of Coke to a Japanese person that was expecting 600 milliliters, then you're going to get some very, very odd looks. Anytime you move into the physical world, there's another entire set of problems that you're going to encounter. Digital is relatively easy to fix. Physical is not. If you had already built all of these cups, if you had already shipped all of them out, you've got another set of problems to replace them, as opposed to just going into a website and adjusting the location of a logo. Now, as an example, when I was putting this slide together, I originally put these measurements in ounces. You have no idea what ounces are. So even as I was building a presentation about cross-cultural communication, I made a very elementary mistake with weights and measures. So weights and measures is something you always have to check when you are thinking about these things. There's also very easy to make some dangerous assumptions when you are taking an existing product and you are rolling it out into a new market. So here what we have are two screenshots from speedtest.net. So every time you go to Speedtest and you see how fast your internet is, they see where you are, how fast it was, and what device you were using. So on the left is Japan. Their download speed on average for Android is 21 megabytes per second. For iOS is almost 29 megabytes per second. So very fast. Their top 4 devices are all Apple iPhones. Now let's say that you've built an iOS application and deployed it in Japan, and then you realize that people in Ukraine want to do the exact same thing. Well, in Ukraine, your average download speed is a little under 8 megabytes per second. Your iOS speed is a little over 10 megabytes per second, and the top 2 devices are Android. So if you were to take an iOS app that is optimized for a 29 megabyte download speed, and you were to try to sell it in Ukraine, it is not going to work. And so if you make an assumption that everybody else works like you, lives like you, and has the same technology that you do, it's very easy to make these sorts of mistakes. I want to give you another example. This is a snapshot of a Google map of a city in Northern Ireland. And as you can see, right in the middle of this snippet is a city. It's not 2 cities, it's 1 city. But it has 2 names on it. There's nothing else on here that has 2 names on it. So why would some Google product manager decide to put 2 names on 1 city in Northern Ireland? Well, if you don't know the local situation, it's very confusing. But if you do know the local situation, what you know is that if you are a unionist, meaning that you favor the union of Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom, you call this city Londonderry. If you are a Republican, meaning that you favor the unification of Northern Ireland with the Republic of Ireland, you call this city Derry. And if you call this city by the wrong name in the wrong neighborhood, something very bad might happen to you. So this poor Google product manager had to decide how to fix this problem. Now, I think this is about as good a solution as you can, just put both names on it. But you still have to decide which one is going to be on top. So I don't know how he decided on this particular orientation, but he did. And so it's just these sorts of assumptions that you have in your local market, you just understand. These are just all things you know. You know what size a large Coke is. You know what size the city is. As soon as you move into a different market, you have none of these built-in knowledge points that you can use to build your product. So that's why it's so critical to do your homework and research before you move into an external market. So here's the important thing that product managers have to do. So everything I've talked about up till now is not cheap. So what you need to do as a product manager is ask yourself, do I want to move outside of the market that I understand? And here's a checklist that you can use. The first one is, does anybody outside of the market that I know want my product? If you have something that is very, very focused on your local market, on a local city, you may not want to expand. You may be very happy just operating inside the market that you're in. Second, do you understand the market you're targeting? Or can you find out what you need to know about the market you're targeting? If you move into a neighboring country, many times it's very easy to get local knowledge. You can hire people. For example, in the United States, we know quite a bit about Canada and Mexico because we're next door. It's relatively easy to get that local knowledge. If we try to move into mainland China, it's much, much harder for us to acquire that kind of local knowledge. Do you have the budget for the engineering work? Remember that form that I talked about? If you don't have the engineers that can figure that stuff out, then it's probably best not to try it. Do you have a budget for legal and compliance? So let's imagine that you are an American company and you want to move into the EU. Do you have the budget to deal with GDPR? Do you know what GDPR is? Do you know how the German privacy rules differ from the Swiss privacy rules? Can you hire a Swiss lawyer to help you find out? If not, you probably shouldn't do it. If you have a physical product, it's very critical that you have a plan for localized marketing, sales, and support. It can be a huge challenge, especially with physical products, if you don't have people that are on the ground that can actually go in and deal with issues like transportation, that can deal with issues like taxes. Somebody has to get the lights turned on. Somebody has to come in and get the internet connected. So the more physical you are, the harder it is going to be to take your product or service and deliver it into multiple markets. All right, so that's the first half of my presentation where I talk about how hard it is. And in the second part of my presentation, what I want to do is spend some time discussing how if you work inside an organization that has offices in multiple countries and wants to sell a product in multiple countries, what are some of the best practices that you can engage in that will make it easier? Many of the examples I'm going to use today come from my own life. Inside Matic, we have an engineering office here in Ukraine. In previous companies, I've worked with engineering offices in the Czech Republic, in India. I have had business stakeholders in Europe. I've had business stakeholders in Asia, in South America, and Central America. So unfortunately, all of the stories about people making mistakes come directly from me. So with Matic, in San Francisco, California, we have product management, we have design, we have marketing, and we have growth. In Columbus, Ohio, we have product management, we have our insurance sales team, and we've got our legal and compliance team. And then here in Lviv, we have product management, engineering, quality assurance, and some other functions. So everything that we do has to move between these three offices. And these are spread across 10 time zones. San Francisco is 10 hours behind Lviv, Columbus is 7 hours behind Lviv, and then there are 3 hours differing between Columbus and San Francisco. So time zones just by themselves are a huge challenge. As you think about global organizations, what I've learned is that trust and building trust between the different cultures and the different offices is the most important thing. If you have trust, everything else I'm going to talk about gets a lot easier. Unfortunately, building trust is the hardest thing when you are not seeing people every day and you're not working together every day. So there are really 5 things that I want to touch on. The first one is that you should agree how your team is going to collaborate. The second is that you should over-communicate. You should communicate more than you think you should, rather than less than you think you should. You have to choose the right communication channel and the right technology. You have to consider language and cultural differences. And the most important one is that you have to assume good intentions. If you assume that other people are not trying to offend you, if you assume that other people are really doing their best, then all of the rest of this that I'm going to cover gets a lot easier. First, you have to agree on how the team is going to collaborate. And you should involve all of your team members in this discussion. If you work together regularly across offices, talk about it. What time is it okay to schedule meetings? What time do people get into the office? Do people need to drop their children off at school? Simply talking about this stuff as a team lets you agree on the right way for you to meet and collaborate. Establish clear rules. If one rule is no meetings in Lviv after 7 p.m. local time, if everybody agrees on that, then if you need to violate the rule, you know that you can ask, but you know that you need to ask for it ahead of time. Don't schedule a meeting at 9 p.m. Lviv time and then be confused why everyone is angry that you've made them come. And finally, document your decisions. Write them down. And this is important not only because of the people on the team now, but because of the team that are going to come on later. We all want to grow. If you've documented how you're going to work, when new team members come on, you point them at the wiki page, they know what the rules are. It is always easier to create a new culture than to change an existing one. So if you are starting a new team, if you are starting a new organization, do this as early as possible, and everything else will be much easier. Second, over-communicating is better than under-communicating. Favor clear communication over subtlety. I've had this challenge in my career. In the past, I've worked with lots of people from the United Kingdom. People from the United Kingdom like to be subtle. They don't like to give obvious orders. So an executive might say something like, "Do you mind scheduling a call on Tuesday?" That sounds like a request. It's not a request. That was an order. But it's not immediately obvious that it was an order. And so if you favor clear communication and recognize these challenges, you can say something like, "Please schedule a meeting on Tuesday." That is clearly an order. I want you to do this. Time zones increase the cost of confusion. So if there is confusion and you're spread across 10 or 12 time zones, a small mistake can cost you an entire day's worth of work. In a previous company, all of our quality assurance was done in India. I was where I am now in Columbus. India was in India. And what often happened to me, I was the engineering manager, and I would come in the morning and I would find out that the testing server had been down all night. So I had 30 QA people who had done nothing all night long, and nobody called me. Now, I was very frustrated by this. We talked about it. Yes, if this happens, call me, we'll get it reset. Then it happened again. And so if they had been located nearby, they would not have felt bad about calling me, about waking me up. We would have gotten it fixed. But because you're spread across time zones, you will lose entire days over small points of miscommunication. Finally, when in doubt, ask questions. So let's go back to my earlier example. Let's say that this UK executive has said, "If you don't mind, could you schedule a meeting on Tuesday?" The follow-up is, "Do you want me to schedule a meeting on Tuesday?" If he goes yes, then you schedule it. Ask the question. Don't leave the room. Because as soon as you leave the room, as soon as you close the Skype meeting, it becomes much harder to go back and get clarification on these points. Face-to-face time is valuable. It is expensive, it is hard, it is exhausting, it makes my back hurt, but it is very, very, very valuable. So if you can, especially when you're starting with a new team or a new organization, get on a plane as quickly as you can. Go to where they are. Have dinner with them. Understand how they live. Understand how long it takes them to get to the office. And once you've done that, you can take all of that back with you and start to build these clear rules of communication. For example, I know that it takes Alvin 90 minutes every day to get to work. He lives in San Francisco. It is a miserable place to commute. So I just have that built in, knowing that that's what his morning looks like. And if I need to do something in that piece of time, we'll just schedule it and he can do it from home before he goes to the office. Simply by having worked together, discussed it, established clear rules, all of these things get easier. Use technology effectively. We have so many different ways to collaborate, and all of them are effective in different ways. So what I've done here is created a graph, and this is less complicated than it looks. So at the bottom, we have a slow way to communicate. If we need to exchange ideas, down here it's slow. Up at the top, it's fast. On the left-hand side, we've got low context, and on the right-hand side, we've got high context. And by context, I mean everything surrounding the words. Do I know your body language? Can I hear your tone of voice? Can I see you? That's high context. Low context is I don't have any of those things. So let's look at email. It's slow. I write an email, you get it, you read it, you reply to me. It's low context because all I have is what's in the email. I can't hear you, I can't see you, I can't directly ask you about things. All I've got is that email thread. Slack is a lot faster. I type you a message, you see it, you read it, you respond to it. And it's a little higher context because I can put emojis in there. If I'm joking, I can put one in there, you know I'm joking. I can put a video in there. I can link out to all sorts of other pages. I've got more context. So it's a richer form of communication. Wiki page. We use these a lot. They're very slow, but they're very high context because I can write a full document, I can link out to other pages, I can embed a video, I can embed a sound file, I can link to a recorded video conference, And I can see a full version for every change that I've made to that page. So if I want to know the context of this communication, I can. Phone call, very fast. I say something, you say something, I say something, you say something. And it's high context because now I can hear the tone of your voice. If you're angry, I know that you're angry. If you're tired, I know that you're tired. It's just a much richer form of communication. Video conference. I get everything that I got with phone call, but now I can see you. If I can see that your dog has knocked over a potted plant in the background and you now have to go deal with that, it's okay. So we can slow down and let you do these things. And face-to-face is the richest. And you get everything you get with the video conference, but now we occupy the same space. If it's hot in here, we both know it's hot in here. If it's loud in here, we both know that it's loud in here. And so because we're sharing the same space and communicating quickly, it's a very rich communication. But there's a problem with everything up here in the upper right. If we don't write it down, it disappears. So we can have a great conversation, we can decide all of these things, but if we don't turn it into a wiki page or an email, then we've not documented what we decided on, and it's very hard to go back. So whenever you have an important decision to make, think about how you want to talk about it. Think about how you want to collaborate, and choose the right channel. If you are very conscious about the right channel you choose, you're going to get a better result. Finally, what I want to talk about is language. I call this, I know what he said, but what did he mean? Because many times you'll understand all of the words that somebody said, but the way that they put them together makes no sense. And this is because figures of speech and idioms. Americans have a terrible habit. We use sports idioms for everything. And we use sports idioms for sports that nobody else plays. So for example, an American might say something like, that was a softball question. And what he means is, that was an easy question. If you have never played softball, you have no idea why that means this is an easy question. Well, on the left is a baseball. It is small, it is hard, and it is thrown very fast. It's very difficult to hit with a bat. On the right is a softball. It is big, it is brightly colored, and it is thrown very slow. It is very easy to hit with a bat. So if you've never played baseball or softball, if somebody used this idiom, it would make no sense. So especially with Americans, if we reference baseball or football, just stop us and ask what we meant, and we will explain it. Now it goes the other way. My Ukrainian friends have assured me that this top one literally means Lord or lost. If you directly translated that into English, I would know those words, but it makes no sense to me. Now, when they explained it to me as an idiom that means I'm going to take a risk, and it can either work great or it can be a disaster. Now, I know that the English idiom roll the dice matches almost exactly to that. If I roll the dice in a game of gambling, it's either going to come up right, and I'm going to make a lot of money, or it's going to come up wrong, and I'm going to lose all my money. So many times we have the same idioms, we just have to go in and dig through and find the right way to translate them. Finally, the most important thing, lunch. People bring their manners with them. Different cultures work differently. Everybody has to eat. For example, in the United States, we will commonly start lunch anywhere between 11 a.m. and 12 p.m., and we eat very fast. Oftentimes, we don't even stop working. We'll just work right through lunch. We'll eat right at our desk. The French think that that is what barbarians do. The French will go to lunch about 12 o'clock. They will come back whenever they're done. And a working lunch is very unusual. They'll do it, but you have to ask ahead of time. So as an American working in France, I had to be very aware of this. If we had a lot of work to get done, I could say, does everybody mind if we do a working lunch today? But we then had to have a 10-minute conversation about whether or not that was okay. Eventually, everybody agrees, and we can work through lunch. And one last example. I was in Shanghai about 2 years ago. I was there to help sell some software. We had a local office. Shanghai is very hot, very hot. It was about 32 degrees Celsius that day. I was wearing a suit, a tie, and a white shirt. We had a meeting in the morning, we had lunch, and then a meeting in the afternoon. I went to my morning meeting, then we walked to lunch. I was very, very, very hot. We sat down at lunch. I was there with 2 of our local office people, and the server comes and brings us all glasses of water. I was very excited about this because I was very, very, very thirsty. The server sets the glasses of water down. I pick mine up, and I take a giant drink because I am extremely thirsty. No one had told me that in southern China, they drink very, very hot water, almost boiling. So I had just picked up a glass of extremely hot water and taken an enormous drink and just scalded my mouth and my throat. And I'm at a business dinner, so I can't spit it all over him. So I had to swallow it. I don't think I've ever been the same. But this is just a small example of things that you would never think about, but that you need to consider when you're bringing other people in. Food is important. Not only lunch, but dinner. It is a time for people to get together, to talk, to get to know each other in a less formal way. So if there are customs that other people should know, just make it a point to tell them and help them with the menu. We very much appreciate recommendations. A few last points. Names are important. Give it a try. A good thing to ask is, what should I call you? They might have a different preference. They might have a nickname, something that's easier for you to say. Let them decide. Remember that other people don't understand your local situation. If they say dairy when you think it should be called Londonderry, give them a little bit of room because they don't understand. And just remember, other people bring their manners with them. They dress differently, they eat differently, they come to the office at a different time. Just talk about it, and it gets a lot easier. And the last slide, and this is difficult for me, jokes are hard. Everybody thinks something else is funny. Everybody thinks something different is funny. Jokes do not translate. It is very, very difficult to take something that is funny in one language and take it into another language. Especially early on in a relationship, don't assume that other people think the same things are funny that you do. Now, once you get to know each other, it's a good thing that you can do. If you've had a few drinks together, you can laugh. But especially early on in a formal business environment, it's good to leave humor until you get to know people a little bit better, because you can get yourself into a lot of trouble. All right, up next, what we're going to do is I'm going to turn this over to Alvin, our head of growth, and he's going to take a few minutes and talk about the growth function at Matic. And then after that, we will have time for a Q&A. All right, thank you.